All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining in tonight. I'm super excited because we have a legend joining us here on the channel tonight. Someone that's taught me so much about the two books that we are going to talk about tonight and actually put into the ring to battle it out, with that being Hyperion or Hyperion and Dune, two behemoth sci-fi books right here that should be in anyone's library if you're a sci-fi fan. So, with that being said, I wanted to say, Quinn, thank you so much again for being here tonight. When I think of Dune or Hyperion, you are the guy on YouTube that comes straight to my mind. So it's amazing to have you here with me tonight. So again, thank you.
Thank you. That's really nice to say. Yeah, I'm a big fan of both of these book series. I don't even know when I made my first Hyperion video. I don't even know how I found Hyperion or who recommended it to me. I just ended up reading it one day and just like loving it and just thinking like, wow, really nobody is talking about this book series. Because when I put out that first video, I remember looking. I remember looking for content about Hyperion. Is anyone talking about this? And there was really no one.
Hmm.
So I thought I should make some content about this. And when it came to Dune, I was actually a big Comic Book Girl 19 fan. I don't know if you know who that is.
Mm-mm.
But she did the Dune book club like years and years ago. But before that, she would always mention Dune and talk about Dune. So I actually read Dune because of her. So I feel like
Wow,
there's like a
no way.
cool, yeah, there's like a cool chain of influence from YouTubers to YouTubers with like Dune, and I think that's cool. So that's awesome, dude.
Just to add some clarification, guys, in this book battle, again, it's going to be Hyperion versus Dune, two huge books. But in terms of how we're going to put these together, it's going to be 6 different categories where Quinn and I are going to give our own individual rating, and we're going to average that out for each book and see which book has the highest score out of the two, based off of the plot, the characters, environment, technology, creatures, and the last one, the ending. And we all know, if you're watching this, you probably have read one of these at least, most likely both, if you're watching this video here, because they're huge, especially if you are a Quinn's Ideas fan. You know he has some content that definitely delves into both of these books. That's actually helped me out a lot. So in this case, I'm going to reference you as the lore expert, with me being a enthusiast. I read the books and I really enjoyed them, but you are the lore man.
I consider myself as just an enthusiast, too, for the record. Just for the
Perfect.
record.
Well, so to get things started, I think a good spot is going to be the plot, which I know the plot is definitely very different between these two books.
All right, I guess I'll say, okay. The thing is, the plots are very different, and they're like kind of difficult to compare because Dune, especially that first book, is a pretty straightforward plot. You know, it's got a
Mm-hmm.
beginning, a middle, and end. Whereas like Hyperion is like a collection of a bunch of different stories that are tied together with an overarching plot, and then the overarching plot is not finished by the time the book is over. So it's a very different like type
Mm-hmm.
of narrative, which is interesting. I would say that Hyperion has a lot more going on in it, though. Like Hyperion has a lot. I think the world building, especially in that first book, goes a lot further as far as Hyperion is concerned, as opposed to Dune, where you really only see Arrakis and you learn
Mm-hmm.
bits about like the outside universe from just like little snippets. You only get like a little bit.
When I'm reading these two, like the tropes are different in my opinion, for sure. In terms of Dune, it was more of like a chosen one, almost like a chosen one prophecy almost, in terms of the trope that you're getting. You have Paul, who's the main character, who is going to be the guy that you're writing with the entire story, and that's his story really. You see him, come into a position of power, and you see him struggle to get to that power. Whereas Hyperion, like you were saying a second ago, it's a collection of stories that all tie together in some way. And I think it's called a framed narrative, in terms
Yeah.
of there's a certain way that is structured from beginning to end, with things happening around the 7 stories or the 7 pilgrims.
Yeah.
Right.
And the thing about Dune is that it is that first book definitely is the hero's journey. Like Frank Herbert doesn't begin to deconstruct the hero's journey until Dune Messiah. but the first book is definitely like presented to you as like this is what it is. I mean, there's little hints that like it's off a little bit, that it's not exactly the hero's journey that you know and love, but like he doesn't begin to deconstruct it until the second book. So I think that the narrative in Dune is a lot, like I said, more straightforward and simpler when put side by side to the narrative of Hyperion, because Hyperion is outwardly about this, I guess, like galactic war between a bunch of different figures that come into play, like the Ousters and the Techno Corps and the Hegemony. But I guess like the close knit narrative is about like these other characters that are on this pilgrimage. So there's so many different like layers of plot narrative to Hyperion that for me, if we're going book for book, which book comes out on top as far as like narrative, the first book, it has to go to Hyperion for me. Even though I'm a huge Dune fan and I love Dune, it has to go to Hyperion. So as far as like plot, if I have to rate the plot of Dune versus Hyperion, I think that Dune for me gets a solid 8, whereas Hyperion is closer to like a 9.5 for me.
Whoa, 9.5.
Plot alone, on just plot alone, because the Hyperion plot is gripping, and I don't know anyone that has read that first book and like not immediately wanted to know what's happened next, what happens next. But you can read the Dune book and be finished with it and never read anything else and be fine.
Exactly. Yeah, I know a lot of people, like when I'm going through forums on Dune, a lot of people are always asking, should I continue after reading Dune? Like that question alone means that there's a completed plot there that you can be satisfied with the story of Dune and not have to continue. But for fans like us, we want to see what else happens in there because there's so much lore to happen, or so much more world building, universe building, and some crazy worm action for sure. And Hyperion, the plot for that one, I mean, like we were talking about, is just a collection of stories that are all insanely wild and different from each other, but all connect, and I absolutely love that about that. And like we were talking about, which is kind of teetering into the last part of this review here, this rating, the ending, but the plot, you need to continue, okay, when finishing Hyperion. So in my case, for my rating, I'm gonna put Dune at a 9. I'm gonna go right with you though for Hyperion being a 9.5 for the plot.
And I think also too what makes Hyperion edge Dune out as far as plot a little bit more for me is that the plot of Hyperion is just so immediately gripping. You're like definitely hooked from like the first chapter. Whereas Dune, you're very intrigued and you're interested, like who are these Bene Gesserit and like what's going on with this kid Paul Atreides. But I would say with Dune, it's definitely a book where I think most people have to read a few chapters in before they're like, okay, I kind of like am into this. I know a lot of people that have gotten like maybe like halfway through that first chapter and put it down and been like, I don't even know what's going on. It doesn't have that same like pull, that immediate pull in that Hyperion has. So that's why Hyperion edges it out. I know I've probably made so many people like upset with that with that rating, but like it is what it is.
I mean, we'll see what the end scores are. I mean, people might be happy with your score at the very end for the book overall. But yeah, going to the beginning of Hyperion, at first I was like, what is happening? And why is this guy's name, is his name actually Consul? I was like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And he's playing the piano. I was like, but he's in this weird planet place with like this rainforest type of feel to it. I was like, what is going on? And then he just blasts off to get that message. I'm like, okay, what pilgrimage is he going on? Because I need to find out.
Yeah.
And like we were saying with Dune, it's a little bit complex right off the bat, which I can definitely see deferring people away a little bit. So for those scores make sense to me.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
All right, so now that we've talked about the plots, for Dune, for the plot, it came out to an average 8.5 for Dune, and Hyperion a 9.5. So far, Hyperion is in the lead a little bit. So let's see how that continues with the next topic going to be the characters. And there's definitely a wide cast for both these books.
Absolutely.
For Dune, I think the cast here is very distinct, but also pretty similar at the same time in terms of the Fremen. But Paul, I mean, he's going to be the character that most people think to instantly when they think of Dune, obviously because he's like the main guy, and Chani maybe as well because that's his side chick. She's always there with him towards the later half of the book. Um,
Yeah,
Also, I love Duncan as well, and Lady Jessica is just uh, another level. I
so
love also
badass.
Rebecca Ferguson did a fantastic job, I thought,
Hmm.
playing her role in the movie, which I'm super excited for Dune Part 2, by the way. I know this is not in relation to the book, but I'm excited for the movie. Absolutely.
I will say the characters in Dune are just so iconic. Like the Baron Harkonnen is such a
Mm-mm.
classic, iconic character. The Emperor Shaddam Carino, Gaius Helen Mohayam is
Oh,
so
yes.
creepy and weird. Piter de Vries, the Lady Jessica, as you said, Stilgar, Dune is just Phaedratha, the Beast Raban. Like Dune is full of so many. Just that first book alone is full of so many interesting, unique, weird characters. I love the characters in Dune because they're so they have their own. I think Dune and the plot and the characters and all of it has, especially that first book, has that kind of weird 1960s sci-fi quirkiness that Hyperion doesn't really have because it was written in the 1980s. So there's a distinctness to it that I find really really cool and like pleasing for whatever reason.
Hmm.
But yeah, I just love the characters in Dune so much. But Hyperion has really great characters too, right? I love
Yes.
personally Martin Silenus. I think
Oh,
Martin
yeah.
Silenus is
He's
so funny.
hilarious.
Fedman Kassad is a cool character. I think that Hyperion has a great cast of characters, but side by side to the characters in Dune, I think that the characters in Dune definitely edge it out. If I have to rate these two books in terms of characters, Dune for me definitely gets like a 9.5, whereas Hyperion I'm leaning more towards 7. Whereas I think all of the
Ooh.
characters
Hmm.
it's got good characters, but I don't know if any of the characters in Hyperion quite reach the level of grandiosity, epicness of the characters in Dune, right? I mean, I don't. It's hard for someone to compare to like the Baron Harkonnen or Gaius Helen Mohayam, or even like Paul Atreides. I think that Dune's characters are classic and iconic, and I think they have survived the test of time, and for a reason. And yeah, so that's my take on that.
No, that's great. Yeah, going to what you're saying about the grandiose aspect of it, I think Dune is definitely more grandiose, especially with Paul, because that's a guy that you can latch on to very easily, especially from wherever you are in life. There's certain things that you can take back to your personal life in terms of what Paul is going through. Um, but from a Hyperion perspective, Soul Weintraub or the Scholar's Tale, like he is one of my favorite characters of almost all
Tearjerker.
time because that story, man, it just puts you in a very, like you're saying, a tear jerker. I was sad, very sad reading his story because it's just so powerful, especially now that I'm a parent as well to a daughter, which is makes it even harder
Yeah.
of a story to read. So, but I do like how each of the characters they have like their own personal story that they do dive into, um, or most of them do dive into in terms of how they're and why they're on this journey to Hyperion in the first place. And we get a lot of good backstory on there. But in terms of like the grandiose aspect of it, I definitely think Dune has that edge for sure.
That's one thing you can say about Hyperion too, is that it gives each of the main characters time to shine.
Hmm.
Whereas the first Dune book is very much Paul Atreides' story, and everybody else is inside of his story, kind of like that. So that's definitely like a point in favor of Hyperion, is that you definitely get more time to like understand each one of these characters and what they've been through in each of their stories. Whereas Dune gives you really, really, really awesome and interesting side
Hmm.
characters. Yeah,
I like that we have the comedic characters as well. Martin Slinus that you were just talking about,
hilarious.
just an absolute joy to read through in his story alone, and also when they're on their pilgrimage together. He's just from the very first scene where they're all eating together around that big table, like, okay, this guy, I'm gonna remember
And
him for a long time.
his back and forth with Bron Lamia, I think, is just really, really great throughout the book. It's just really, really great, and I love the fact that he was born on Earth. I think
And
that's
that's
a
such an
really interesting
interesting.
fact about him,
Mhm.
because you learned early on that like Earth is something happened to Earth. We don't really, it doesn't tell you from the get go, but we know something weird happened to the planet Earth, and so we meet this character. And we learn that he was born on Earth, and we hear his story. It's just all very, very interesting. So, God, it's really, really hard to. Maybe I should change my rating on Hyperion. Now that I'm
Ooh,
talking it out, now that I'm talking it out, I'm thinking maybe 7 was a little bit too hasty for Hyperion. So now I'm thinking maybe Hyperion deserves closer to a 9. Closer to a
no
9
way.
because just because of the way that Hyperion allows us to explore each of the main characters in a
Hmm.
way that I think Dune doesn't. We don't really learn that much about Duncan until like maybe later in the books. We don't really learn that much about Gaius, Helen, Mohayim. We don't really see that much of them, or learn that much until maybe other books or later books. So I think that there is something to be said by how much time Hyperion gives us with each of its characters and how well we feel we know each of the characters by the end of the book. Even though I think the Dune characters edge out the Hyperion characters as far as they're just completely iconic.
That's
So,
great. We got a mid-round score change here.
yeah,
Here we go.
had to do it.
I also love that we have a bonus character almost because the very first story in Hyperion, Father Hoyt, if I'm saying that right, Hoyt or
Hoyt, I would say Hoyt.
Hoyt,
Yeah,
Hoyt, Father Hoyt's story wasn't really even his story. He was just going there
his Father
based off
Gray's
of
story.
exactly, and I love that story. Is what sold me on Dune. I mean,
Banger.
that story is what sold me on Hyperion. Absolutely. So I'm gonna go for Dune, just because of the whole epicness of Dune, in terms of what you get and how you just feel for Paul towards the very end of his story from the very beginning. I'm gonna say a 9.1 for Dune. And Hyperion, I mean, I might be partial to it. I'm gonna give it a 9.5 for me
Ooh.
for Hyperion because the characters they stick with me, man. They, especially, I know I already said this Soul Mind Trap story. I freaking love it, man.
It's a great one. I mean, you definitely feel for him. And you feel for all the characters, really. Like, he really makes you believe them in their stories. He really puts you behind them and makes you root for them. Like, Dan Simmons is a great, great, great writer that I think is underrated. And that's part of the reason I like to push Hyperion whenever I can. Because I think people do not talk about Dan Simmons enough.
Hmm. And I got a whole shelf dedicated to Dan Simmons right here.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm a huge fan of him for sure. And going to the scores, now the average for the characters was a 9.3, and the average for the characters for Hyperion was a 9.25. So we are in a very
Neck and
close race
neck.
at the moment. Very close race. With the next category here being, I think it's going to be pretty interesting because they're both sci-fi books. Obviously, we're in space dealing with planets. With the actual category being the environment. So the environments found within Dune and Hyperion being planets, being scenes that take place into both of the books, or just the areas in general, right? In my case for Dune, like the two planets that come up that I can just think about off the top of my head is Caladan and Arrakis. With Arrakis being, you're in Arrakis the majority of the entire story. You're in the sand. You're with the worms. So in terms of that, I mean, is there other planets outside of those two that you can think of? Maybe Salsa Secundus?
Salusa Secundus. Well, as
Oh,
far as
see.
like,
Whew.
yeah, in the first book, you only really see Caladan, and you only really see Arrakis, and you only really hear about those other planets, and you don't really like see any of those other planets for the most part. I'm pretty sure you don't really see any of those other planets till later books. Yeah, so with Dune, you're mainly sitting in the desolate wasteland of the planet Arrakis, and you're really in the desert with Paul Atreides the entire time. Whereas there's a lot more diversity of location with the book Hyperion, even though the entire book definitely surrounds Hyperion. You get a lot more different kinds of environments. You see a lot of different types of worlds. We see like
Mm-hmm.
where all these characters are from. Like Braun Lamia was from like this very interesting kind of like Blade Runner
Yes.
esque
Mm-hmm.
world, which is like I think that was super cool to see. Um, but I will say I think Dune is definitely very very influential. I think a lot of science fiction authors have gone for that kind of like desolate wasteland thing since Dune. So Dune is definitely very inspirational. And I definitely see like a little bit of the Dune influence on Hyperion too. There's no undoubtedly some Dune influence on Hyperion. Just the way Hyperion is kind of like this. I think the book calls it like a backwater planet. I don't know if it uses
Yeah.
the term wasteland because it's not really like a wasteland, but it's kind of like this. It's kind of like this out of the way world, and then it's kind of I think the time tombs and the Shrike function narratively speaking in somewhat of a similar way to like I mean the desolation of the desert and the spice and the worms, the way that functions narratively speaking. It's like the mystery of this world, the mystery of the spice, the mystery of the worms and the Fremen. I think that's there to a certain degree. But getting to the rating of the environments, it's really difficult because although like Frank Herbert does the single environment very very well, and you definitely feel isolated in the desert, you definitely feel the harshness of the desert. Like even reading Dune, like I feel like my throat kind of gets dry and I have to bring some water with me because I feel like I'm actually in the desert. I think there's something to be said by how Dan Simmons creates all of these different environments and makes them so absolutely believable and makes them so interesting and unique. So, this is a really really hard one, but God, God, I think for environments we're gonna go Dune with a 9.3, and then we're gonna go Hyperion with a 9.5.
Ooh.
There we go. There we go.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh,
There we go.
everybody.
Because I just love the way Dan Simmons is operating. Because here's something that should be said too. That Dune was written in 1965 and Hyperion was written sometime in the mid 80s towards the late 80s. So Hyperion is definitely standing on the back of something like Dune. Like Dune is a classic science fiction book, and Hyperion is coming out decades later, where people like Frank Herbert have already done the groundwork and like laid the foundation for so much of what is science fiction. So Dan Simmons can come in and like add more flavor to it. Because,
Oh, yeah.
That's just what people do. That's just how humans work. That's how we evolve over time. Like art gets better and better over time, in my opinion, I think. But some people might disagree with that statement, but I think generally that is true. So
So going to Dune again, like we have our desert planet, we have our water planet. Hyperion, we have the same thing. All right, we have some desert planets, we have some water planets. I think it's called Moy Covenant. I think that's where the
I think
Maui Covenant.
I think.
Where see, I'm pronouncing all these names wrong, so I'm glad you're here.
When you read a book, I see people kill me for my pronunciation too. Like when you read a book and you're not listening to someone say the word, I mean, like I say it how I say it. Sorry.
I was calling it salsa secunda, so we're going for a salsa run here. But in Hyperion, the scene that comes to mind in terms of just seeing so many worlds instantaneously is in Martin Solinus's Farcaster house, where every room is a doorway to a different world, where he's taken a number 2 on a crazy planet out, I don't know, thousands and thousands miles away.
It's like on a raft in the middle of like some like water. It's like so cool. Yeah, that was the idea of the Farcaster system. It's just a really, really fantastic, cool idea. Like Farcaster and Fatline technology, it's all really cool. And then what I think we're not going to get into this, but what Dan Simmons does later with it, like kind of turning it on its head and making it really creepy later on, is I think also really cool.
And also, the labyrinth worlds were just a complete mystery for me when reading through the book. Book number 1, I was like, all right, what are these going to be used for? What's the purpose of these labyrinths? So that alone was very ominous feeling for me.
And I have to say, I love saying the 9 labyrinthine worlds. It's just like, God, Dan Simmons, he really knows how to make it like epic and mysterious. That is definitely his strength. Like he puts something in there like the 9 labyrinthine worlds, this like epic mystery that deals with the idea of like deep time and like the forgotten history of the universe. And it's just like, oh, it's just really cool.
So, with that in mind, for me, the environment. For Dune, I know it's very, like you were saying, that it was the backbone for a lot of books later on, and inspiration for so many sci-fi uh, content, books, media, movies, for so on. But in terms of my read, reading it a couple years ago, I'm gonna give Dune an 8, which is still pretty high, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Hyperion, I think, just because of how much it just sparked my mind and made me think about what the heck is going on here, I'm gonna give it a 9.4 out of that,
I think that's
bringing
fair.
the average for the environment as an 8.65, and the average for Hyperion a 9.45. So we might have a leader right here, but it's very close
Hyperion.
still.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good book. I've been telling these people for years that it's a good book. And I also think, too, just to throw this in, that Hyperion would make a great TV show, HBO
Yes.
adaptation. Like, please do it. It like, the way it's structured, it lends itself to, like, an 8-part series. Absolutely. You could do each story in one episode. It would be great. But
I
just
heard a
throwing that
rumor
out.
somewhere that it might be being adapted here pretty soon by an actor. I
Yes,
forget,
and I did a video about this a while ago, but I forget who the person was
Bradley
that's attached
Cooper.
to it. I think it is Bradley Cooper. Yes,
Oh, there we go.
it's something to do with his production company, but I don't know. I think it's still kind of up in the air. I don't know if like production on it has like gone forward, or if they're
Hmm.
or if there's a script or anything. I know it has. The rights have been bought, is what we know. I think
So you're telling me there's a chance.
there's a chance. There's a chance. It's very exciting.
I mean, if they see how massively popular Dune is in terms of being in the box office,
Yeah.
maybe the next best spot for a sci-fi epic is, I mean, right here. Come on.
Mhm. I think it would be
So
something very unique, and it's something people haven't seen before. It's never been adapted. I don't think the general public has any idea what Hyperion is or how good it is.
no, they see this, whatever this guy is right here, and they're like, "Yeah, I don't know what it is, and I don't want to find out."
You definitely don't want to
uh,
meet him.
oh no, that'll be interesting to see that guy on the screen. Absolutely. Uh, Next category here, which I think is going to be a really fun one because it's a main component in a lot of sci-fi books, being technology. So there's definitely varying levels here of technology.
Hmm.
In terms of Dune, the first thing that comes out to me actually is because I watched like the 1980s David Lynch version of Dune, and I saw that personal force shield that looked like Roblox on Paul and the other characters. I was like, wow. I mean, it gets the job done. I know what they're doing, but
Hmm.
that I love the personal force shield. I think that's pretty cool. The thopters that look like dragonflies flying around. The still suits I think is a good technology as well because it conserves water and allows a lot of people to survive on the planet. And also the hunter seeker, the little thing that stops right
Really
here
cool.
in front of Paul. I love reading that part in the book.
So this is one where it becomes like really hard for me to stay in the first book, because I feel like so much of the technology of Dune gets expanded upon like later on. What I really love about Dune, as far as technology is concerned, is the biological technology, because it's very understated. Like the Bene Gesserit are operating using like certain forms of biological technology. We see mentats who like enhance themselves through like biological enhancement and certain forms of biological technology. Or like the guild navigators who are like
Mm-hmm.
mutating themselves with the spice. So the thing with Dune is that there's a ban on I can't speak anymore. There's a ban on computing devices and computing technology. So we have to enhance ourselves and make ourselves more, I don't know, more adaptable and smarter and wiser. So I think that a lot of the technology in Dune is like very understated. And it doesn't really focus on technology the way like a lot of science fiction does. If we were talking about the later books, I would get into things like, you know, like the axolotl tanks, which and the Tleilaxu, who are very interesting because they're
Ooh,
all about
yes.
that biological technology, and they're very weird and like creepy with it. But it's really interesting how the Dune saga handles that, because that's the ultimate, like, I think, corruption or perversion of that idea, the idea of like biological enhancement. That's the Tleilaxu. Like they take it and it goes like a really weird dark way. But we're not getting into that yet, so that's it. But yeah, I like the idea of the shields, even though to me it's always been a little weird. I can tell that's an early sci-fi idea, the idea of the shields in Dune, because it's a little weird to me that anyone would operate with these shields just in case someone brought like a laser pistol and fired at it, because like it creates a nuclear blast. I feel like it's not worth it regardless. Like, I mean, it's not worth, like, just in case. What, I don't know if you're a psycho and you're bringing a pistol to a shield fight and you don't care and you're just ready to risk it all. So I think the idea of the shield is cool until you realize that practically, like, that's so weird and no one would ever use it. The still suit, I think, is a really cool idea. Like you said, because you would need something in a desert like that to, you know, maintain the moisture. And then the idea of folding space is really interesting. And the Dune Encyclopedia gets really into like kind of the mechanics of that a little bit. But the idea of folding space, I think, is really interesting, in the way the guild highliners work, and the way you need a navigator to kind of navigate to avoid obstacles. So I think Frank Herbert wanted to emphasize the human, like human technology, like how humans. What am I trying to say? I feel like another science fiction series, I don't know, like a random one, would have a starship that's piloted entirely automatically.
Yeah.
Whereas Frank Herbert inserts a mutated human into something. It says, yeah, we've got the ship that folds space, but we still need a person to be there to use prescience to navigate through space. So, whereas Hyperion, but Hyperion isn't slacking on the coolness of the technology. That's not to be said, right? So when moving on to Hyperion, I really like the ousters, right? Who are the humans that like enhance themselves with technology. So they're like kind of blurring the lines between like what even is a human anymore. And also the Tleilaxu do that in Dune, and the Great Navigators and all that too.
Yep.
But I really like the ousters. And like we were talking about earlier, the Farcaster technology, like fat line technology, is really cool.
So cool.
So in Hyperion, it's basically like they have a network, and certain worlds are connected in this network. So let's say I'm on like Earth. If there was a Farcaster portal on Earth and Mars, I could walk to Mars if I wanted, and I'm there instantaneously. Or I could communicate through fat line technology. And also the web is a really, really interesting idea in Hyperion. And kind of like predictive a little bit, like how everyone is connected all the time. They're voting on any number of legislation all the time. I think that's really cool. In both series actually have like glow orbs, like the glow globes. Like I'm pretty sure Hyperion, that might be like a direct reference to Dune. I'm pretty sure Hyperion mentions like the floating light orbs or something like that. So that's really cool. And then there's so much with Hyperion. The Technocore, I think, is a really, really interesting idea, right? So, like I mentioned earlier with Dune, we've banned computers, and they didn't just do that willy nilly. They do that because we can't trust these machines. Like, what are you thinking? Don't trust the machines, obviously. Well, with Dune, it is a little different because it's more about the men in charge of the machines. But with Hyperion, you have the Technocore, and the Technocore is so interesting because this is a conglomerate of intelligent AI that basically lives alongside humanity, and they're independent, but they work with us sometimes, and no one knows anything about them, but like, we're just kind of like letting them do their own thing. That's really cool. So yeah, like both of the series have totally unique ways in which they like show the technology, in which they present the technology, and the types of technology that they present. and it's very difficult to compare. It's another like really really hard one. It's another like really really difficult one because God, you really did pick the two books that are kind of like neck and neck to me for like
Oh yeah,
like two of the greatest of all time. Like I definitely think Dune is like people know about Dune, right? But Hyperion is one of those ones that's like very underrated that I think a lot of people don't know about. Um, God, this is difficult. This is difficult. Because how many times have I fantasized about Farcaster technology or just like
that
even like
technology alone
yeah,
is
just
just
that
super cool.
alone.
I don't know if it was I don't think we actually visited this location in Hyperion or not, but River Tethys. Is that how you say it right? River
I think
Tethys.
so. That's how I'd say it.
That idea is just so mind-boggling to me that you can ride a boat and just travel down the stream, going to planet after planet after planet, and I absolutely love that. I love how it's more
So
explored in the
cool.
future sequels, but
Hmm.
not in book one specifically. But I love that technology there. And also, the Mobius Cube. Hopefully, I said that right as well. I thought it was
Hmm.
so interesting. It's like this containment box that you can carry around that holds like a nuclear bomb inside of it,
Yeah,
which is insane.
it's
And then like
wild.
the what's it called, the Shron loop that
Hmm.
holds like data storage of almost like in Cyberpunk 2077. It holds uh, the personality of Johnny Silverhand.
Hmm.
Something's kind of similar to that, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, just both series are definitely very very creative with the technology.
So now, what is your rating for the technology?
Okay, so my ratings for the technology for me they're so neck and neck because they're both really really cool with the way it's presented. So I'm just gonna have no guts and go 9.5, 9.5.
All right, I mean we can do that. That's fine.
I'm, I'm gonna go 9.5, 9.5. I'm gonna tie on technology, because there's so much to like about Hyperion's technology, and I think the technology in Dune is very unique and creative, and the way Frank Herbert handles technology, I think, is very unique and creative. So,
Those are fantastic scores. I'm surprised we have not had a solid 10 yet for
we have
one of these
17.
categories, but
Yeah,
maybe in the last two. We'll see.
we'll
But for
see.
me, technology, I think Dune, like you were saying, it's just so classic in terms of some of the ideas explored here, but he puts that little spin on it, like you were saying with the Guild Navigators. He's like, you know what, we'll step this up one more level. I love that.
Hmm.
So for that, I'm gonna say 9.6 for Dune
Nice.
and Hyperion, just because uh, the Farcaster alone is one of my favorite technologies I've read in a sci-fi book before. I'm gonna say 9.7.
Oh,
Point 0.1 right above of Dune. So that puts our totals very, very close here. Dune is sitting at a 36 overall, and Hyperion is sitting at a 37.8.
ooh, that's
Still
very close.
very close. Now the next to last category here is going to be the creatures, and you might have more ideas in mind, but the reason I chose this one is mainly because of the worm versus the strike. I mean, that's the two things that I think point out to anyone reading these books as being like the most apparent things, entities in these stories that you're like, okay, what's the purpose of this and what's going to happen?
Yeah.
So, what's your thoughts on the creatures in these books?
Yeah, so let's just go with the strike and Shai Halud because those are the big ones that we're gonna compare. I think both of these creatures have this element of mystery, but the element of mystery is like way, way, way understated in the Dune series. Frank Herbert doesn't draw any attention to it. Like, what are these worms? And where did they come from? That's not something we get into until like I guess later in the Dune series, and then even then, not even really. So I guess the worms and the Shrike kind of represent something similar, right? They are the kings, the pharaohs, the god kings of their dominion, right? the Shai-Hulud is the god of the desert, and the Shrike is the lord of pain, right? So they kind of represent the divine in both of these series, right? Because you got the pilgrims, they're beseeching the Shrike,
Mm-hmm.
doing the Shrike pilgrimage, like seeking out a wish, and like the Fremen revere Shai-Hulud and Shai-Hulud's power, and in a weird way, without knowing it, the entire empire worships at the feet of Shai-Hulud because everyone's addicted to spice, and spice comes from the worm, which is like the big secret of the planet of the world Arrakis. And I did call the Shrike the most terrifying creature in science fiction. Like that's my wording. I totally did say that in the video because it definitely is a terrifying creature, right? I'm trying to think. I'm trying to imagine. Like, would I rather be face to face with the Shrike, or face to face with like Worm Sign, and I know the worm is coming, and I feel like it'd be hard picking. Okay, so the Shrike has all of these powers. Like, the thing that makes the Shrike. Let's focus on the Shrike for a little bit. I think the Shrike is very, very scary. One, because it's got this humanoid shape.
Mm-hmm.
It's shaped like a person, right? And there's some kind of malicious intelligence there that I think that if I was face to face with the Shrike and those glowing red coals of its eyes and the weird shifting metal of its body and the way it seems to distort time when it moves, it kind of has this kind of otherworldly, almost like Lovecraftian quality about it, where it's like, this is something that is like, that doesn't belong in front of me. I shouldn't be around. Like it's like, that is really, 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 really freaky. And on the same side, I love the way that Villeneuve did the worm sign and when the worm comes. Like the way when you are in the dominion of Shai-Hulud, this is his dominion. Like the way Paul starts to sink into the ground when it's coming, it's like the sand, Arrakis itself is opening up to swallow you. Like Shai-Hulud is the reckoning of Arrakis, and like this is his place. So that is also very, very, very scary. I don't know if you've ever like been around like a large animal, like an elephant or like a big horse, but big animals are freaky to be around because they're so freaking huge. Like I always think that like if I was in a boat and I saw like a whale or something, that would freak me out because it's just so big. It's so much bigger than I am. So God, the worm definitely does have like this epicness to it and this giant scale that I think is very, very freaky. And also it's iconic, right? It's something to like, we keep going back to this, but it's something that has stood the test of time. All you need to show somebody, you just show them like a picture and they know that is the Dune worm. That's Dune. It's iconic.
Yes.
Everyone knows what it is. And while I think the Shrike is definitely like an awesome creature, it's super scary when you're reading the book. There's something about Shai-Hulud and that worm that's just iconic. So that to me, we're gonna do it. We're gonna go 10 on Dune.
Ooh, here we go.
9.5 on Hyperion. Shai-Hulud.
Wow.
Shai-Hulud comes from that neck. I personally think Shai-Hulud would just swallow him up. Swallow him up.
The Dune worm swallowing up the Shrike. That'd be a hilarious scene.
Someone draw the fan art right now.
So our first 10 so far of the night. Wow. So yeah, going to that, I also really like how there's so many layers to the worm, Shai-Hulud, that even the Fremen, they ride these creatures. They ride them almost like as a rite of passage in order to become like a true Fremen. In terms of like, that's in the trailer to Dune Part 2, where he finally rides the thing, which I'm super excited to watch that scene. And like you were saying, it was just so cinematic to watch that in Denis Villeneuve's version of it, when it's just like Jessica and Paul are running away from it, and it just pops out of the ground, just stares at them ominously. Like that's kind of what I pictured in my mind too when reading the book. It's just that huge round hole of spikes and like thorns looking things from its mouth is just scary. Absolutely. So love that. Also, one more creature, Muad'Dib, the
Muad'Dib.
hopping
How did
desert
I
mouse.
know you were going to mention that? Yeah. I definitely think Muad'Dib is super cute, and he definitely works as a nice little mascot to the planet Arrakis. And I love the fact that he is on one of the planet's moons. I think that's a super like cool idea that he's like the mascot of Arrakis. So yeah, Muad'Dib's definitely awesome.
I like that we got that little scene too in the movie where he was just hopping around.
You needed it, and it was like a little Easter egg. Like if you know it, you know it. If you don't, you don't.
Mm-hmm. And then the Shrike, right? This guy, at least in book 1 alone, it's just like so ominous. You have no idea what this guy's purpose is. What is he doing there? Why is he staring at me? And why is he putting people on this tree? Which I thought was interesting, that there's actually a bird called the Shrike that impales its prey on thorns, which I thought was absolutely crazy that Dan took that idea from a bird and transformed it into this crazy ominous creature on this planet Hyperion that you have no idea what its purpose is and what its intentions are.
Or where the heck it came from.
Or yeah, where it came from, and also it can somehow transmute and transform into hundreds of them at the same time, which I thought was crazy. And it gets a little bit spicy for one of our characters in this story in terms of some sort of creature having, an event going on there. So,
that was an interesting scene. That was an interesting scene.
That was very interesting. But in terms of my rating now for the creatures, Dune, the worm, right? Because obviously the mouse is cute and funny, but like you were saying, anyone can instantly recognize the worm from Dune. Even I can send in the emoji of a worm when I'm talking to my book friends, and they know, okay, he's referencing Dune, obviously. I'm gonna say a 9.8. And Hyperion, I'm gonna give it a 9.8 as well.
Oh, neck and neck. It's neck and neck, guys.
So we were very close. And the last category here is the ending. So, in terms of the endings of these two, I think a good spot to start in terms of Hyperion, for me at least, is that when you get to the ending of this, you're like, okay, that was the ending? Because if so, what the heck happens next? Because this entire book, you're going through these stories of these 7 pilgrims. You're learning how they all interconnect, how they interweave, and how they relate back to the planet Hyperion. And then they finally get to the destination right in front of it, and then the book ends. They're singing the Wizard of Oz song, walking down the yellow brick roads, and you're just like, okay.
Here are the time tombs, the end.
What happens next? And then Dune, like we were talking about at the very beginning of this video, you can read this entire book and be satisfied and not pick up any sequels. Like you were talking about. Beginning, middle, end, and you can be a happy camper after finishing this book. All right, so what are your thoughts on it? Yeah, huge cliffhanger or good ending?
Yeah, okay. See, the thing about Dune's ending though is that it's not like a typical ending either, because it's kind of like, yeah, it's over, but it's like in a weird way. It's like satisfying, but not satisfying. Right? It's almost like anticlimactic in a weird way. It's like, okay, now give me your daughter and you step down I'm emperor. And then he gets everything he wants. So it does it's a weird ending. It's like satisfying but weird. Like I think Dune is one of those types of endings where it's like if you've been reading between the lines the entire time, then you know that it's like set up for like something to go wrong, right? Obviously, Paul is like talking about terrible purpose throughout the entire book. Like something, that things from Paul becoming emperor on shouldn't go like that great if you've been reading between the lines, right? So it does have a beginning, middle, ending. And I also love, I really, 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 really love the last line of Dune with Jessica to Chani. history will call us wives, because it's just such a great way to end the book, because I think the book is like kind of like it's I mean, it opens up with Jessica and it ends with Jessica. So it's a great way. It's like an opening and closing. It's like the Bene Gesserit are kind of like the cornerstones at each end of history. I don't know. You know what I mean? But yeah. So I love the ending of Dune, even though there is something about it that I think hints that there is more. But the ending of Hyperion to me isn't really an ending though. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's the thing about Hyperion. I think Hyperion and the fall of Hyperion are definitely like companion pieces, right? I feel like
Mm-hmm.
they
They
are
go
part of,
together.
yeah, they're like the same big book to me. Where it's like Dune is one big book, and then Dune Messiah is another book, and then Children of Dune is another book. I feel like you have Hyperion, Fall of Hyperion, you have Endymion, Rise of Endymion. I feel like that's a book, and then that's a book, but it's just split into two. So I don't really feel like it's an ending. That's the thing. So that's why when like comparing them together, it's like weird, because it's like comparing an ending to, like you said, like what's really like a cliffhanger. Um, Frank Herbert did say something about the ending of Dune that I've always thought was like really interesting. He talks. I think he specifically used the word coital. He said it's like he builds Dune up like with a coital rhythm where it gets faster and faster and faster and faster, and then it kind of just like ends.
Yes.
It kind of just like
Mm-hmm.
drops off, and like that's the ending of it.
That's how I felt about it. Like
Yeah.
Dune, the ending came super quick. He got, like we were saying, he got what he wanted right away, and then it's like, all
Hmm.
right, here we are. But
And then
then
and
it
then
leaves you with the question in terms of, all right, how does this work after
yeah,
this?
how does it work after that? Because I think it was George R. R. Martin, right, the Song of Ice and Fire writer, that said he always wondered what Aragorn did with the rest of the orcs after the Lord of the Rings. Like, okay, Aragorn is now king. What happens next? Is everything just fine now? So I think that's what Frank Herbert was trying to do with Dune Messiah and Children of Dune. He was like, okay, now that the hero is won, let me just turn that on its head and deconstruct that. But you wouldn't necessarily know that from reading the first Dune book unless you were watching very, 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 very closely. So it does read as like a solid ending. But then to the comparison, this might be the hardest one because I feel like they're so different in terms of endings.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And before you make a rating, I wanted to give my rating first, just
okay,
so that you can be the guy who sets the final rating to get our final score.
let's do it.
Because I think it just feels right. You are the Mr. Dune and the Mr. Hyperion guy to me. Um, but real quick, something that comes to mind in terms of just, I don't know if you read Brandon Sanderson that much, or Brandon Sanderson, in terms of the Stormlight Archive, but one of the famous lines in there is like journey before destination. And when I think about that, in terms of Hyperion, right, this whole book is the journey where we
Absolutely.
don't get to the final destination. In Dune, we have a journey, and we have at least one destination with a lot more destinations later on. So, with that being said, Dune, the rating for me for the ending, I think it's going to be a solid 9, and Hyperion is going to be an 8.5 for me.
Hmm.
So, now it's up to you.
Okay, I'll say this too, just to like on top of it. I think that the ending of Dune, right? I think a lot of people might not only feel like they don't need to read the next book, they might not want to, right? They might just be like, oh, that's enough for me. But with Hyperion, by the ending of that, you're not going to not want to read The Fall of Hyperion. You're going to actively want to read the next book. So I feel like as a strategy for selling books, at the very least, like Dan Simmons
Mm-hmm.
like knows what he's doing very, 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 very clearly. But I think the ending of Dune, when you really analyze it, and you're reading Dune the way you're supposed to, and you're like going back and like looking at it several times and like reading through the subtext and just getting what it's trying to say, there's something about that ending that is pretty beautiful, pretty bittersweet, and ominous if you're looking at it the right way. And I feel like it's a classic ending, and it's one of the most. It's I mean it's a classic book for a reason, right? So we're gonna go the ending of Hyperion. We're gonna give that a 9 because like it's a great cliffhanger. It's a great cliffhanger, undeniably.
Mm-hmm.
But with Dune, because it's so classic, because it's so well written, we're gonna go 9.5.
9.5.
On the end.
And here we go. Drum roll, please.
Let's do it.
Dune came out to a final score out of 60, 55.15. Hyperion came out to 56.2.
Oh!
So we have a winner on our hands, everybody.
Very close.
Hyperion over Dune. But subjective, right? If you're watching this, you're like, there's no way. Well, you can have your opinion as well, and it's always welcome. But in this case, Hyperion is the winner. So I can't believe it.
Both are fantastic. Both of them are excellently written.
Mm-hmm.
Like both incredible authors. Like Dan Simmons, I think is underrated, like I said, and he definitely needs more attention. I think he's great. And honestly, I'll say this. I don't know which Dune fans I'm gonna make mad with this, but if I was recommending a science fiction book to like someone that hadn't read science fiction before, I would definitely recommend Hyperion before Dune, because I think Hyperion is just a more accessible book, the way it's written. Dune is a book that's more for like experienced people that have read a lot of science fiction and that have read some classic science fiction. But Hyperion, he came in swinging. That's the thing with Dan Simmons. He came in swinging with the book. He came with something to prove, and I think that it definitely deserves it. So
overall, I think this was a fantastic scoring. I'm very happy. I know the people that watch my content, they know I talk about Hyperion all the time. So I'm happy. I'm happy with the results here.
I'm happy with the results too. I feel like these books definitely get compared a bunch. I think they're kind of like, they're both great. Like we said, yeah, they're both great. There's no reason you can't like both of them.
Yeah. You know what? We can all read the books that we want to. I think that's what the main point of this video should be. But also, another point is that they're both fantastic books. I mean, they're both 55 out of 60, 56 out of 60. I mean, those are A+ books right there. Quinn, I can't thank you enough for joining me tonight. This little streamer here, or this little YouTube account that I have going on, I can't wait to watch more of your videos. Thank you so much for teaching me about the lore in these worlds, because sometimes you read it over and over and over again, you're like, it's still not clicking with me. And then watching your content, it helps out so much. So,
well, thanks for inviting me. Anytime. It was a lot of fun. This was really, really fun. Like, really, I love doing this type of stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining in. And don't forget, Hyperion was the winner. And Quinn confirmed it.
I'm going to have so many people mad at me. Don't be mad at me. It's fine. It's fine.
All right, guys. Have a good one. Peace.